Let's start. So welcome everyone. Good morning. Welcome to this PXMSOFT webinar from regulation to readiness. Today we're going to be looking at how to effectively manage the EU Pay Transparency Directive, looking specifically with the PXMSOFT solution for equal pay. So there's going to be two speakers today. Myself, Ian Dunn, Director in Gaudi Group, based in Copenhagen, working with pay and salary structures and indeed HR technology for the last 25 years. And I'm working or supported today by Jakob Stigord, Director in PXMSOFT. And Jakob is going to be taking you through the solution, looking at the specific functions and features. Obviously, we've got limited time today, but we'll be giving a good overview really of how our solution can augment and support your teams to manage the pay directive and proactively manage that really in real time. So we'll get into the details of that in some more detail as we go through. Okay. What we want to start today is really just give you an overview, really, of those of you who don't know us already, PXMSOFT, what we're actually doing. We'll talk a little bit about the Pay Transparency Directive and what that actually means, right? So why does equal pay matter now? It's not a new concept. It's been around for some time. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then we move on to how to actually bridge the gap. What is it that you're trying to actually bridge, what you're trying to achieve? Why is it important right now? Once we get through that, we'll quickly move into a demo. As I said, we'll have limited time, but I think we'll have sufficient time to cover all the main features and functions and show you how you can manage this in real time and how you can actually take away the admin, the reporting burden, and also decrease the actual risk, because there's a lot about cost and risk here. And our solution is very much focused on supporting your internal teams across different countries to tackle this in a risk-free but sort of proactive way. Okay, we will then leave some time at the end for some Q&A, which will hopefully give you a chance to answer your questions. We will respond to as many questions as we have time for. If there are additional sort of questions, what we will do as a follow-up after the webinar is that we will collate some of the key questions. We will share those with you so you can get answers. So please don't be worried if your question's not answered. We will come back to you and answer your question after the actual call. Okay, thank you. So if we move forward, then just to tell you a little bit about PXMSOFT. So PXMSOFT is a part of the Gaudi Group. It is a standalone functional application development and bespoke application development company that is working to support HR teams, primarily across EMEA, but we do have clients further afield as well. On the left here, you'll see some of our standard applications which are available in the market. And we're really trying to focus on areas driven by client needs, by wider HR gaps in the market that we can actually accelerate the actual process. We're also working with clients on accelerator applications, looking at areas where we can actually add value, speed up the processes, or indeed take out friction in the HR processes. And indeed, the equal pay application exemplifies that really today, of how we're actually trying to actually speed up, strip out, and ensure that you are sort of compliant across the organization. We are working with many organizations doing custom development as well, where we're looking at the specific requirements of your organization and really looking in 8 to 12 weeks to build apps that will tackle those sort of specific problems with a smart, automated, and of course AI-driven solution where possible. Okay, Last but not least, we spend a lot of time working with clients, providing a kind of advisory services around equal pay. That will be around the actual core data, around salary structures, around grading, around preparing and doing all the actual prep and background work. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move further through the presentation. Okay. So if we look at the first kind of slide here, I think really our real sort of focus is why transparency matters. Why is it now? And I think if you look across the EU, the average gender pay gap is 12%, right? Now, the average, of course, as we all know with statistics, doesn't tell all the actual truth in terms of the gaps. So that's just a headline figure. But if you look at some of your countries, you'll see that Austria is sitting at 18.3%, Germany 17.6%, Norway even at 14.3%, and even Sweden consistently ranked in the top 10 globally for gender equality, has an 11.2% pay gap, right? So pay gaps do exist. And the thing really that we need to kind of sit up and take notice of, that these aren't activist statistics, right? There's a Eurostat figures, they're the same data and figures that, you know, regulators, journalists, and indeed employee representatives, job candidates, all those out there are looking at right now. So there's a high awareness, there's high access, obviously, to the actual data. And for many years, pay equity has perhaps been a, you know, moral conversation, but as of June the 7th this year, becomes a legal one, and it changes everything for HR's role and what it actually needs to be, right? So we're going to cover three things in about 20 minutes. What the law actually requires of you, what it's going to cost if you try to manage it manually, and how a purpose-built tool can turn this from a compliance burden potentially into a competitive advantage. Okay, so if we move on from that, let's see if that works. Okay. So if we then, 1 second, I think the slide transition needs to catch up. There we go. Okay. So if we look at where kind of the reality is, and we've done extensive research in PXM working with clients across our different markets, really to understand what that is and where we are right now. And this is a slide really maybe one you want to sort of take a screenshot of and one you want to keep for later, but we will of course share the actual slides with you. But if we look at the column on the left, before the directive comes into force, the expectation was largely self-regulated, right? So annual reporting, if you choose to do so. Some organizations we have seen have done that, others have not, right? So it's a best effort pay equity statements. The employer asserted, of course, fairness, and that was broadly accepted in the actual market, right? So that regulation approach was the way. If we look on the right column here, we see that under Directive 970, which is live as of June the 7th, the rules are categorically different, right? So firstly, you'll see that we've got mandatory, not optional, but mandatory structured reporting for organizations with 100 or more employees. So that's not optional, and it's not a best effort, it's mandatory, right? Secondly, we will see that employees now have the legal right to request pay information, and you have response deadlines. You can't take months to respond. You've got specific deadlines which are detailed, and you need a process and you need documentation to support any outcome of these assessments. And I think what's the most significant shift is that this one that keeps employment lawyers awake at night is that the burden of proof moves directly to the employer. So you're no longer presumed fair until proven otherwise. If a gap exists, you have to prove that it's justified. And if it's unexplained gap exceeds 5%, a joint pay assessment is triggered automatically, right? So that's a major shift in terms of the burden, in terms of the time element, in terms of the related cost, which we'll cover on there, right? So this is not a HR compliance tick box. It's not something, it's a structural legal exposure. And the question for every HR manager on this call is, do you have the data, the process, and the documentation to defend your pay structure today, if you're asked to do this tomorrow? Okay. So just moving on there a little bit more is, looking into a little bit more detail of what's in scope and what the actual timeline is about. So let me be clear about who this affects, and really the timeline is tighter than most organizations, I think, have realized. So some have been sort of proactive, developed internal processes, some are still thinking about it and considering, right? So the directive itself came into force in June, way back in 2023. So June the 7th, 2026, which is not too far away, is the operational deadline. So that's when you need to have live data and processes running internally. The pay structures need to be defensible. Employee request workflows need to be in place. So this is not the reporting deadline. This is the readiness deadline, right? The first external reports go to national authorities from June 2027. So if you've got 250 or more employees, you report every year. If you've got 150 to 250 employees, you report every 3 years. So there's very, very clear deadlines, very, very clear obligations that you need to meet, right? 4 specific requirements cut across all organizations of sizes from June 26. 1 is the annual gender pay gap reporting. 2 is, employee pay information requests with legally binding responsible obligations. And that's the kind of 2 months that you'll have to answer those. And then the burden of proof sitting firmly with the employer, as I mentioned earlier. And this joint pay assessment triggered whenever an unexplained pay gap exceeds 5%. And that's something which Jacob will look at the 5%, and we look at how we can actually find exactly what is behind unexplained pay gaps. And that's key to what we're going to actually look at today. So if you're here almost certainly looking at this in scope, the question is whether this applies to you. It's whether you're ready, right? And that's this sort of focus in terms of where we're going today. Okay. So then I want to kind of look at something which we see as important when organizations in our own research have said that they're actually ready. I really want to kind of challenge that sort of common assumption that pay gaps are obvious, and that that actually if you had one. So in our experience from working with HR teams across EMEA, right, the gaps that create the most legal exposure aren't the ones in published salary bands. They're the ones that accumulate quietly, decision by decision, across the actual organization. Okay. And as you see on this slide, there are many activities which you'll all be very familiar with. So if you think, for example, about off-cycle hiring, a candidate negotiates above band. No one checks whether this creates an internal equity issue. If you multiply that across 100 hiring decisions over 2 years, you've got a serious problem on your hands. And this is happening across many organizations, right? You've got promotion velocity. So are different groups progressing through grades at systematically different speeds? This pattern won't show up in a single salary review, but it compounds and compounds over time, and it shows up clearly in aggregate reporting, right? You've also got market adjustments, and we see the market is changing rapidly. There's the war for talent. We're trying to get key talent in, but market adjustments and retention uplifts, these are really applied to critical talent, but they're being applied consistently, or are they unintentionally, perhaps, or, running alongside different sort of demographic lines. So I think that's a huge issue for us. And then last but not least, we have the maternity factor, leave impact, salary reviews progressing while employees are on leave. You've got country level management discretion. And you've also got legal pay structures absorbed through M&A. And most organizations we work with are going through some sort of transformation. They are acquiring new companies, they're exposing, there's sort of integration and mergers. That has a huge implication, and that they can impact what may otherwise have been a consistent pay structure and pay parity. So none of these decisions, if you look on this slide, were really made with discriminatory intent, but intent is not a legal defense under the new directive, right? The outcome really is what's reported, and the outcome triggers a joint pay assessment. So the gap you won't see is the gap that hurts you. It's the one that you cannot kind of, manage. It's really the one that you kind of need to look at and see what you kind of need to measure. Okay. Moving on, very briefly, what I want to look at next is a function around the actual costs. What's the operational reality around costs, right? Now, there are lots of people out there. There are scaremongers, building up huge costs figures or whatever to, scare individual organizations. We take a very kind of realistic approach. So let's look at the numbers and see, is this the conversation you need to have with your CFO, right? So the model is built for a 10,000 employee EMEA organization with an average compensation of 60,000 and a 2.5% employee request rate, right? We actually believe, but we didn't want to be over pushing this, that if you look at the average pay gap at 12%, we do believe that more than 2.5% employees will request a report, but this really just trying to give you an overall figure of minimum exposure so you see what's required. So if an employee requests handling alone 500 requests, roughly 2 hours each, and I think again, that's conservative at a full loaded salary of 60 euros per hour. That's 60,000 per year. Now, obviously, we have support and a detailed cost and model. We're working with clients. We work through that individually, but really just to give you a figure. And that annual pay gap reporting across 10 entities where you've got to do that done manually, we think that's time intensive. You're having HR business partners, you're having country managers, you're having line managers. There's a lot of organization, a lot of time, hidden time often goes into that. And we estimated that is a realistic figure of 50,000 euro. So really add that together as well as the HR productivity loss and the allocation of a resource, perhaps 1 to 1.5. We put 1.5 for calculation purposes here, which adds an extra 90,000. And then you've got all the kind of modeling, financial modeling, correction planning, forecasting, which can be quite intensive depending on the actual gap. But we reckon that the total compliance cost is somewhere in the region of 350 for that type of organization. Now, obviously, some of you will have more centralized organizations that may ease this. Others will have decentralized organizations, will have larger population, will have larger pay gaps, and that figure that we're actually presenting will go up or down, and we do offer detailed modeling and costing support to help you with this as we go on. So this 350 that you're seeing is really a factor before risk exposure. You've got fines, litigation, you've got the risk of talent acquisition when sort of pay inequality becomes visible to the market. And it will become visible. That's the point of the actual directive, making it visible, making it something that companies need to actively report on. So we do believe that you are going to see a lot more reporting, accessible reporting and tools to employees and to job seekers that are out there in the market so they can actually get in and see how a company is ranked in terms of pay equity. Okay. So we built this financial model, as I said, you can use after this session. We'll work with you to actually link up the model. And we'd encourage, I guess, every HR manager on the call to run the numbers for your business before, with the directive comes into place. And that's some of the pre-work we talked about there. Because 350,000 in manual processing costs is a substantial investment. And as I said, that can go substantially up or down depending on your organization. But there's a clear business case really for looking at something that's going to streamline that and to actually move that forward for you. Okay. So if we then move on to specifically the kind of requirements of meeting the requirements of the directive, I think, as I said, we've done significant research across the market. What we're seeing is two things. We're seeing as people got a standard approach, we often see that, the standard approach on the left that most organizations are taking today. They've got annual backward-looking gap reports, reactive correction after reporting, manual request handling, fragmented documentation, and the risk discovered at audit or claim stage, right? So clearly, this sort of leaves you open to sort of budget surprises from unplanned payroll corrections and ultimately a more defensive legal posture, right? And what we are trying to do is get to a PXMSOFT approach, which is based on real-time continuous pay equity monitoring. So you see the gaps as they form, right? And if you go back to what we talked about, off-cycle hires, local pay increases, M&A, lots of changes are going to happen, right? This is not an annual reporting exercises or taking a snapshot. Your organization is continuously changing, and therefore the pay equity picture is changing in line with that, right? So the proactive prevention method, which we're going to show, and Jakob is going to show in the demo in a few minutes, is really trying to anticipate the gaps before they become reportable. Gives you a structured, automated workflow for employee pay information requests, which, as you see, will take a significant amount of time investment. And it gives a full audit trail with the documentation. So every response is time-stamped, consistent, and defensible. So the risk is managed really before you see the actual exposure. And we think that the forward modeling, so your remediation budget is planned and not a surprise, is a key feature of what we give overall. I think overall, the kind of board readiness governance reporting enabled your leadership team to actually have the confidence that they need know what's going to happen here. So this is not going to be a surprise. And I think the key difference really here between the two columns isn't just operational efficiency, it's the difference between in control, essentially, of your pay equity story or having it told, for you, right? So what I'm going to show now Jakob is going to show, is the PXMSOFT tool. And what's kind of important here is that the tool, and you will see from different perspectives, is very much thinking of the different roles, the different stakeholders across the business. We've got certainly board reporting from CHRO. We have obviously HR business partners. We've got payroll. We've got to look at audit defense. We've got to look at the calculation integrity. And of course, we've got managers and employees across the business who will be involved directly and indirectly in terms of making this. And really the solution that Jakob's going to show is something that covers the responsibilities of all of these roles to make sure that the organization is working in a consistent way and making sure that you are not in a way exposed. So I'm going to hand over to Jakob now, and I will come back at the end to deal with the Q&A. So thank you.
Thank you, Ian. And I might need you to, So let me switch to my screen and let's get into the weeds of it. So a few points before we get started. As Ian started by showing, what we do in PXM is that we build applications, and we build applications on top of SAP BTP. So that's a sort of a technical prerequisite, but that also means that what I'm going to show you now is data in real time, data coming directly from your HR data sources, meaning that you're moving away from scattered files and so on, and into a full solution that provides you real-time data, real-time insights into your data. It also means that your role-based permissions and the setup that you have running in your HR system, success factors, and so on, that will apply here as well. You don't need to reinvent a completely new setup to work with this application. I'll take you through, you can say, largely three main areas of the application. I'll take you through a executive dashboard view. That view or those insights are broken into this view that is the overall snapshot of your current scenario. It's a local or country-specific view, and that it's an organizational view. Those are the overall unadjusted raw data values. Then we'll step into a section where we are focusing on the adjusted values. Obviously, that's sort of getting it into a level deeper and actually working with the adjusted values. And then we'll be looking at the operational readiness related to the request handling and the audit reporting that needs to be done to authorities down the line. Basically, the tool allows you, and across the different scenarios, the tool allows you to accelerate the processes that you need to be running come June 2026. The first view, this overall dashboard view, provides me, in this scenario, I'm a global HR business partner, but obviously it would provide executive management, payroll, or whoever to work with the data and to get the insights for the Equal Pay Directive, and basically get critical data insights into different scenarios. The scenarios that is required to be supported by the legislation is obviously view on mean versus median scenarios. So the tool caters for the mean and median scenarios, both when you look at your base pay scenarios, but also looking at it from a variable pay element. So variable pay elements is obviously a critical component also of the legislation as it comes out in June this year. So insights into base pay, insights into the variable pay elements. These information is also shown in real numbers. But what we also do is we allow you to, based on the data, based on the structures that you have in your underlying systems, obviously, this will also translate into insights into the scenarios or the pay gap across the organization. So depending on the structures, you can sort of navigate the data that you have. So if you want to see the scenario from a Swedish perspective, or if you want to see it from a Danish perspective, this is the data that we have in our system, but obviously this would reflect the data that you have in your system. If you have this pink color, it means that you have pay equity where women is the high earners, and the blue indicates the men is the high earners. All of these charts are obviously dynamic and will show you the data as well. We also provide insights into, as it is part of the legislation, the variable pay, so you can see the amount of employees, male versus female, getting variable pay elements, but you can also get a view on those not getting variable pay elements and how this stack up in your organization. And then obviously a critical component is also being able to look at this from a pay grade scenario. So how is the organization distributed, or how's the split between male and female when it looks to the looking at the different pay grades? So pay grades aligned with your job band structures. As said, we just latch on to the underlying system that you have. So depending on you running Conferry, Mercer, whatever schema that you might be running, we obviously, or the system obviously just aligns with that. So an executive view tailored around the roles and the accesses that you have. So in this case, I'm a global HR BP, allowing me full access across the piece. Had I been a business partner with limited access, it would have been different scenarios. Obviously, down the line, we'll have time slices so that you can granularly go through the different data points over time. Besides, as mentioned, this executive sort of snapshot, we also cater for regional or localized snapshots. So this is a risk heat map scenario where basically we are removing the guesswork and stepping into a much more clear data-driven scenario. Again, looking at mean, looking at median scenarios, allowing you to see what's the scenario across your different entities in the organization. What you can do is you can zoom in on the different countries, and then you can see how the scenario looks for these countries. You can see what's the scenario for Norway, what's the scenario for Sweden in our data. You'll get high-level essential insights showing you the metrics relevant for the given organization. So what's the number of employees, so on and so on. And obviously you can then also further get visual indicators showing the specific scenario for the organization in the given country. As mentioned, it's a heat map, so red countries is where you need to go and basically do actions, making sure that you're ready, so you don't faced with the different litigations that comes with the regulation. This data can also be two ways of looking at the same data, but we also provide the data in a list view. It's essentially the same data, right? But what we see is the heat map scenario, same visuals or same elements that you'll be looking at, but shown in a different way. So overall dashboards giving you real-time snapshots of your current scenario, regional or localized snapshots showing you exactly the scenario across the entities in your organization. But what we also have is the organizational insights. So breaking this down, you can say even further into how does this then stack up, or how does this look from an organizational point of view? Again, your underlying data is what will be reflected here, but essentially breaking down your entities bit by bit, seeing where is it that you need to make sure that you carry out certain activities, making sure that you get on parity with the equal pay. This obviously both is hugely value adding from a sort of senior managerial point of view, that you can actually drill into the data, remove the guesswork, but it also gives you operational excellence or acceleration in terms of you from a business partner point of view, actually being able to go and engage with the managers locally, making sure that the things are evened out and actually supporting the need. So drilling down into the different entities, in this case, your divisions, your business units, your departments, seeing the scenario across the piece, getting the central entities or central metrics. So in this case, we have marketing. There's a mean pay gap for marketing that is above the 5%. You can see the metrics. You can see how this, the consequences of these scenarios, or what's the reasoning behind it. Again, just high-level dashboard, localized, country-specific dashboards. Then we have your organizational dashboards, allowing you to see the information across your organization. All in real time, all supported by role-based permissions. So if you have, as Ian also pointed to, if you have these merger and acquisition scenarios, if you have larger changes within the organization or even smaller changes, it will reflect in the application. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to have files being moved in and out of the application or sitting and cleaning data across your different scenarios. Breaking this down even further is obviously then also being able to look at it from a individual point of view. So you can go in and see, okay, a given employee, what's the scenario here? How does this look from employee? Again, fetching the data. You then also start looking at the scenario for an individual employee. So essentially just breaking it down bit by bit, high level, regional, organizational, and then into the employee. For the raw, unadjusted values, allowing you to achieve operational excellence when it comes to working with the data. And again, just emphasizing, because it is a critical component, you don't need to do anything if you have your data already wrapped up into the HR system underneath. So basically, fair pay or equal pay in this scenario becomes a structural exercise and not a subjective exercise, because the numbers don't lie in this scenario. The second critical element is obviously then moving from your unadjusted numbers, raw data, into the adjusted scenario. The adjusted scenario in our application is supported by two different elements. We have what we call the adjusted salary insights. What it will provide you, and my screen is, I'm going full screen, but what it will provide you here is a view on what's the overall pay gap across the organization. How does this stack up? What is the explainable pay gap and what's the unexplainable pay gap? This then translates into scenarios of flagged employees, where these are the employees across the axis that you have that is outliers when it comes to the equal pay scenario, even though that we factor in certain adjustment factors. So what we have is we have the adjustment factors. That is something that is retrieved via regression analysis. I'll show you that in a second. The way that you then go about executing on these activities is that you actually then obviously need to look at each of the cases. You have open cases, you get the insights, you see the numbers. So from a payroll business partner, whoever is the one executing these processes, you would go in and actually look into it case by case, then slowly resolving the cases with notes, etc., allowing you to collaborate across teams, but then basically grinding through these scenarios, making sure that you even out and close the gaps throughout your landscape. So this is not the employee request handling. This is you proactively working with the data, making sure that you don't expose yourself down the line for the requirements of the directive. The system automatically flags these based on the thresholds that's in. So in this case, it's the 5% threshold. So what we'll see is that all these employees are above the 5% threshold, meaning they are flagged for action. The adjustment factors, which is obviously the element here that is, you can say, where you make sure that you move from the unadjusted to the adjusted, is based on, obviously, there is an admin interface to this. We won't go into that today, but largely you can, or we, the application, can retrieve those adjustment factors based on the data that you have in your system. So we have a regression analysis aligned with the requirements of the legislation that allows you to drill in to the data that you have. So if you want to see what's the variances, if you look at it from different perspective, if you look at a job family, how does this look? What's the gender? Inequality? What's the learning? What's the performance? What's the seniority inequality? And then going through the elements bit by bit, making sure that you support the scenario, or basically getting into control with the scenarios of the underlying data. These adjustment factors, this regression analysis, allows you to then work with the factors, moving them in either to the adjusted salary insights from a managerial point of view, making sure that these factors are aligned with the needs or with the data as it is, or actually working with the data underneath. So the regression analysis is sort of the beating heart of your adjusted pay scenarios. It's working directly on the data that you have, so you don't need to. It provides you real-time insights of the data as it is. It's obviously a bit sort of I don't know if it's called technical or complex, but obviously those of you knowing your data, knowing that there are, let's say, there's much more under the hood than just the data as it's shown in a dashboard, or shown in a report, or shown in a Power BI. This is exactly where the regression model takes you that step away from just looking at a pretty picture, but actually getting into the weeds of, or into the data as it is. Again, making sure that your equal pay scenario doesn't become a subjective exercise, but actually is supported by the structures and the data that you have in the application. So what we looked at is the operational insights, managerial insights across overall, across local, across organization, employee view. Then we've looked at, very briefly, looked at the adjusted scenarios, both from a what's the flagged employees, where do you need to execute on things. Then we looked at it from a regression perspective, and obviously you can run the regression analysis again and again and again. What we want to move into now is your request handling. As mentioned, request handling is a critical element, and I think it might be the element that provides you or provides organizations with the largest concern. How do you actually make equal pay into an operational discipline rather than just creating reports or creating data that really doesn't give you much, and it is part of the legislation as it comes out. It's a critical component. What the application allows you to do is to get these requests as they're raised by the employees, either in your ticketing system via emails or in an application supporting the request being created. Then the request shows up, depending on the role, depending on the accesses, etc., shows up in here. And then a request would then allow you, and again, this is accelerating and augmenting the scenarios across HR or support or whoever working with this, allows you to accelerate the processes. So an employee, as it's right now, legislation is not hammered down in all countries yet. I think there's only 2 where it's settled. But as it looks right now, an employee is allowed to request information every 6 months, and then you have a few months to answer this. But with this tool, you don't need months to do it, because what we're doing is we are basically just fetching the underlying data and then giving you as the business partner full flexibility to work with the data that you want to share with the employees and in the manner that you want to share with the employees. So you can change the messaging, but the template provides you a outset and a starting point for working with the requests. So what it provides is obviously the numbers that you have in the underlying system. It provides insights into, let's say, average pay, for instance. You can, if you want to, you can choose to add supporting charts that might reflect or might provide some guidance for the employees understanding the numbers. What we also do, and this is where you sort of turbocharge your way of working with these requests, is it provides you, or the system provides an assessment. So what we put in is business rules based on thresholds, saying what's the scenario for this given employee. So in this case, the pay is not within the expected range, but you might also have obviously scenarios where it's in the expected range, and then the system would automatically cater for that. So this is not and we've deliberately chosen not to make this a fully automated, just sending out this data without being monitored, but it allows you to really, really effectively run the request handling in a structured and in a fair way across the organization. Once you're ready with the report, you can then obviously there will be a message ready to share. Our recommendation, and I might run into problems now because I've moved my tabs, but our recommendation is that you provide the insights in as a link, supporting also a different agenda being the GDPR, so you don't end up having all of this data stored in your in emails and so on. But that's the request handling. You can obviously reassign it to a different employee. You can reject it. You can work with these requests, these workflow scenarios. So handling this doesn't become a one-off exercise, but it becomes an integrated workflow within the organization, whoever might be working with this. You might obviously also have the scenario where the manager or someone else puts in the request, at which point you'll go and fetch the data for other employees. Just underlining the fact that has been said a few times, it's real-time data, and your current setup in terms of roles and so on would obviously also apply here. The last element that I'd like to focus on is your the national or the authority reporting, because what we've looked into now, insights, adjusted insights, employee request handling, but there is obviously a authority reporting that's a critical element as well. So just like we saw with the employee requests, the system creates or has a template built in that sums up the numbers across the organization, if that's the relevance, or you can granulate this based on your national numbers. Norway might be a bad example. Let's go with Sweden instead. Across your local scenarios, you can provide the insights to the authorities as they sit in the system. End of the day, what that brings you is a report ready to be shared with authorities. You don't need to run around, find the data, combine the data, or whatever. You simply get the data based on the information as it sits in your underlying master data system. You can also, in this scenario, choose to add visual components if you choose to do so. I think a important element, and some of you might be sort of scratching your head and saying, if we don't have all the data in our underlying HR system, what do we then do? The application also offers, obviously, the ability to import data, either as Excel sheets or even better as a sort of integrated API towards, let's say, a payroll provider or wherever you might have the underlying data. So that is also part of the application as it sits. But obviously, the recommended approach is that you get your structures, or that you have your structures in order in your HR system. The structures being your job structures, your pay structures, and all of those elements that feeds into this. But we will see, I'm most certain, you will see lots of organizations, or we know that already, where variable pay, for instance, is not an element in your master data system. Then it's a matter of getting that in via, as said, either Excel-based imports or APIs if your data sits somewhere else. So, just repeating, as I've done a few times, senior executive insights providing you snapshots of the data as it is, adjusted salary insights, either employees flagged for working with, so getting you into this operational level where you can actually start executing on the employees, but also having the really sort of efficient regression analysis showing you the reality of the data that you're working with, and then the request handling, both from an employee perspective, but obviously also for the local authorities. So with that being said, I think, Ian, I might be handing that back to you. To unmute yourself, Ian.
Okay. Can you hear me? Perfect. Thank you very much. Just try to come back on camera. It goes. There we go. Okay, thank you very much, and hopefully that gave you a good overview to actually see what's going on. So we just have some time now, as I said, for some questions and answers. We will follow up and share written responses with you after that. But I think one of the questions you already covered, I think, Jacob, was around the added data sources and using multiple data sources if you don't have everything coordinated from one, HR system or a system of record, which is fine. So I think we've covered that. There was something around, because you touched on data GDPR, etc. What about the role-based permission setup? Does the current role-based permission setup apply, or how does that work to make sure you have control across the business?
So as mentioned a few times, yes, the current role-based permission does apply. As part of implementation, as a recommendation, I think you might need to revisit the roles as they are, the access points, but the overall role-based mission framework will work. And if it fits the bill, then happy days. Otherwise, you might be needing to create target role or roles and target groups, etc., to support the equal pay. But the framework and the technology in the underlying system will apply.
Okay, thank you. And a second question here is, does the directive require real-time pay gap analysis?
No, the directive doesn't clearly or doesn't require real-time insights. I mean, there's too few ways to answer this. So the obvious answer is no, it doesn't require it, but it provides you with operational excellence that far exceeds the scenario where you need to sit and have data moving in via Excel sheets or from external sources. As you also pointed out, Ian, what was the headline? The gap is where you don't see the gaps, or whatever the value is for the gaps that you don't see. So the merger and acquisitions, the ongoing data changes that will be relevant in all organizations is exactly where you start to expose yourself. So it's not, I mean, you could, if you have an Excel sheet and you're working with it today, then the only thing I can guarantee is that tomorrow it'll be obsolete. And that's exactly why real-time access to the underlying data sources is such a value add when you're working with the data, because you don't need to consider, is this the data as it is, or is this outdated data, whatever. You know it's always on par with the reality of your underlying system.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question, just in terms of implementation. What's the implementation required by the team to implement the equal pay application?
So from our side, it would typically be 5 to 10 days of work, assuming that your underlying structures are where they need to be. If the underlying structures are not where they need to be, then we'll engage with you to make sure that you get that sorted out. And Anna, who's my great colleague on the call as well, is the reigning champ on making sure that your job structures and pay structures and so on is in place. But under the assumption that that data is where it needs to be, the implementation and basically the enablement of your organization is a 5-day exercise. So it's a lightweight approach. What needs to happen is that we need to obviously map your data sources. We need to understand where's the data coming from. And to be honest, that's largely it. But obviously there is also enablement and testing and so on. So a 5-day timeline is what we're looking at.
Okay, thank you. And another data question, where actually, and obviously this is a concern for many organizations, but where's the data actually stored? And that's a question I think we've had from a number of people.
Yeah, so the data, and again, this is also a value add. Your data obviously sits still in your master data sources. So this doesn't become yet another master data source. It is working, visualizing the data that you have in your master data source, but it doesn't own or store the data. If you're importing Excel sheets, obviously that's a slightly different scenario, because then data would reside in the application, but your master data sheet or the data sheet that you imported is still the source. So from a GDPR perspective, and also from a sort of a handling of data perspective, the data doesn't sit in the system just works with the data. And that is across the PXM solutions. That's the beauty of working with SAP BTP, that it allows us actually to work with the data without having to store the data. So we don't need a huge database to store the data, and you don't have this scenario of data being out of sync or whatever, because the data will always be represented in real time.
Okay, thank you. And just in terms of time, maybe one final question. As I said, we'll answer some of the other questions there. Obviously, a lot of the pay differences can be down to participation rates of different people, but also bonuses. And there's a question really in terms of variable pay elements, of how they're configured, whether they're configured in success factors, and how we actually deal. Can we deal with variable pay so we get a full picture and understand, as you said, whether it's base pay, variable pay, or what elements.
Yes. So the way that as mentioned, as the implementation also works on mapping the data, you have the freedom to choose which pay components that is relevant for your equal pay reporting or what's relevant to be shown in the system. So yes, we can fine tune the pay elements in the application. Obviously, base pay is relevant. Most of your bonuses or variable pay elements is also relevant, but you might have pay elements that shouldn't be part of the overall picture. So there we can fine tune what is actually part of the application. Obviously, that also you need to be aware that that's then you doing subjective choices, but I'm pretty certain that you will have different pay elements that wouldn't be factored into the pay equity reporting. So I think that's a yes, if I can answer yes to that question with the data. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll just in terms of time here, I think we need to wrap things up. Just in terms of next steps, I think there's a couple of things that we can offer in terms of support. So the first thing we would say to you is we're working with a lot of organizations doing a compliance readiness assessment. And this is a short exercise which gives you a standard report in terms of identifying key areas that you need to look in, gives you an overall view, quick snapshot of the areas where you need to focus across your business in terms of preparing. And we would encourage you, we have had significant increase in that over the last coming months. June is not far away. So please reach out and we will follow up with each of you on the call. The second thing is we showed some statistics in terms of costs and what the potential cost would be. We have built up our own PXM financial model, and we can work again with you because it's very, very individual based on cost structures, based on HR organization, etc., and based on salary levels, that we can provide support in terms of the actual financial exposure. So that financial modeling can help either in terms of making an internal business case in terms of how you do this, or looking at the potential exposure given where you are currently. So please reach out if that's relevant for you. And finally, I think Jacob's covered off a lot of features and functionality, but each organization is different, will have different ways of operating across different markets and different business areas. So we're very happy to actually run, if you'd like to request a detailed platform demo, provide the information specific to your organization, your structures, so you're ensured that you're going to be able to meet all the specific business requirements that you will have in your organization. Okay. So that's a follow-up from us. We will reach out to you. Thank you very, very much for attending today.